afternoon. Thanks very much for staying around. I know a lot of people are getting planes and driving extremely long distances to get home. I spoke to someone last night who'd actually travelled by time over the 27 hours that it took me to fly from Christchurch, New Zealand. He was in the car for 27 hours, so I don't know which one of us had the best situation, that one, but amazing how you all come so far to speak or to listen and hopefully give you some ideas about how you can actually grow your program and develop as a strength and conditioning coach. As Ian suggested, that I've been involved with rugby for close to 30 years now, and it's one of those classics. I mean, as we all know, it's our athletes that guarantee us success. We hope that we've added some value to them along the way, but after being so long in this industry, I'm really not 100% sure how much we do add. I know I've probably shortened a few players' careers over the years through my learning and progressions, and hopefully that doesn't happen as much these days. But I want to share with you things that I've looked at over the last decade and a half, 2 decades, as far as what actually works in the programs that I have been involved with. A couple of caveats. I am a rugby strength and conditioning coach, and these may not work in your particular program. I hope they do. I hope you can modify. But I've always been of the belief that if you stay within your own sport and don't look outside your sport, you become very, very insular. And it's almost as if the gene pool starts interacting and basically you become an aberration. But if the more and more that you go outside your own gene pool in the sports and look at different sports, like I love going to bobsleigh and talking to people in bobsleigh. Bobsleigh is all about acceleration. My sport is all about acceleration. So if I can just take one small piece of information from bobsleigh, Gaelic football, any sports that we can actually use are going to be beneficial. We use a lot of Gaelic football in our recoveries, in our little games, and trying to get people metabolically to do a lot more work than they actually realize they're doing because they're actually having fun playing. And I think Joe Kem was really good yesterday, talking about the fundamentals and basically being in it for the right reasons. And that's what keeps me motivated, keeps me alive, and these things keep me alive as well. Just one saying that at the end of the presentation, I'll be around outside. If there is anything that's sitting on my USB or my computer that you want, just come up and ask and I'll download it to you. There could be programs from 10 years ago, there could be programs from last week. So if there's anything you want, just grab me and we'll sit down and stay there as long as it takes to get that downloaded for you. So let's get this underway. A few thank yous. Obviously the NSCA has been a part of my life for 30 years with my CSCS involvement, and I think we're headed in the right direction again. I mean, thanks to Dr. Greg and for his involvement over the last 2 years of the presidency he's put together. It's now, this coaches conference is so relevant. I mean, having been to the national many, many times, I think this is my conference of choice now, in that I'm with like-minded people. I've had so many conversations in the foyer over the last couple of days. I think I've spoken to more people in the last 2 days than in probably 5, 6 conferences at national. It seems to be really, really good to be here, and I'm really happy to be here, so thank you, the NSCA, for inviting me to speak this particular time. I'm going to keep my presentation primarily to the weight room. Obviously, the game of rugby is so totally different to a lot of sports. It's a very, very high metabolic work, and there are things that I've used over the years that have worked in that particular environment, but I really want to look at primarily the weight room. And a lot of this might be teaching you exactly what you've learned, but I think it's also important to reinforce, and if you come to a conference and you get your ideas reinforced, then you're on the right track. It might not necessarily be brand new information, but I have made an entire career since I got my first job in the fitness industry in 1979, and I was a 17-year-old just out of high school. So coming up almost 40 years later, it is the simple things done exceptionally well that count. Doing the complicated things poorly is not going to get you anywhere. And having the best available athletes you have and keeping them healthy. Brian Mann said a fantastic quote in Australia back in November. He said, the best ability is availability. And I think more and more so, as strength and conditioning coaches, we've come full circle and saying, well, how much does that individual need to improve? Not how much he can tolerate. We're here to stimulate, not annihilate. And I see so many programs, and talking to other people around rugby particularly, having massive 4-day-a-week, 90 minute to 2 hour weight training sessions in their off season when we're trying to build other factors as well. We tend to get a little bit caught up in probably what we're good at as well, and I'll address some of those issues as we're going through. But some principles in programming from my philosophy that's actually worked over the years, it's basically heavy and basic movements. If you're not good at coaching the more complicated movements, either learn or modify them. I mean, obviously, NSCA's come from a big, heavy Olympic lifting background, but look at the other activities that are involved in making someone better. In all my program, I used to have a Olympic category, but now that's changed to a peak power output category. So it could be an Olympic lift, it could be a jump squat, it could be a plyometric, it could be all number of activities that we're looking at as far as what is the best for that individual player to get what we need from him or her would be explosive power. Strength, as Dr. Stone would continually tell us over the years, is the mother of all other biomotor qualities. So when you're getting kids coming in, unless they're developed a level of strength that you're happy with, they may well stay in a strength program for an extended period of time. And in my sport particularly, we don't do a lot of hypertrophy. We tend to allow the strength, the hypertrophy to be a byproduct of the actual strength training. Change is important. But remembering in all cases that we're here to train, we're not here to entertain. So by keeping the stress for a period of time, and I like 3 to 4 week cycles in my training, and we'll discuss some of those more productive cycles towards the end of this presentation. But maintaining that stress for a period of time until you see the gains start to slow, and obviously when a person is very new within the program, they may be able to stay on a program for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, with small modifications, just increases in load and changes of sets and reps, before you even start thinking about the more complicated aspects of clusters and complexes and things like that. So, but change something, change it periodically, but don't change too much if it's actually getting you the results you actually need. And this quote will come up a couple of times throughout the course of the presentation, in that, as Louis says, everything works, but nothing actually works forever. An HIT program will work. Will it keep working after 6 years, 7 years, or whatever? No, we have to modify, we have to change. We have to look at individuals and see what works best for them. So as far as my strength training philosophy is concerned, very, very simple, very, very basic. And I guess every single one of you will probably have 80-odd% of the same ideas if you were actually sitting up here talking to the group as well. So heavy and basic, free weight compound movements. Again, simplistic, solid aspects that work. Training time I like to keep under 75 minutes in off-season, and I've tended more to go away from a 4-day-a-week program back to a 3-day-a-week program, depending on the groups that I have. I think the next position that I hopefully find myself in, since I'm one of those 2 types of strength and conditioning coaches, I don't have a job at the moment, and the other type is you probably won't have a job sometime soon. So those particular aspects is looking for the next gig is 3 days a week will be applicable to some people. In season, that could drop back to 2 days a week. And I guess what Joe said yesterday about, and sometimes, some weeks, some of his players won't lift at all. So because they're so beat up, or it's more applicable to them to get to the game day without any residual effects. A strong foundation of strength underpins everything else and needs to be established before we can move to explosive power and speed elements within the weight room. Good structural exercises. I'll discuss aspects of Dan John's ideas as we go through as well. But the ability to crawl before you can walk, before you can run, before you can sprint. And trying to, particularly this in academy programs within rugby, we have these 16-year-old academies, 18-year-old academies, 20-year-old academies programs. And a lot of the younger academy coaches attempt to replicate the professional training program. rather than establishing your basic movement patterns, your push-up abilities. If a person can't do a good solid 10 repetition push-ups, how in the heck are they going to be able to perform a bench press effectively? So to develop capacities before we move to the next level, working up our way through the pyramid as far as the performance and aspects are concerned. Unilateral aspects, I think, in my sport particularly, have been a far underutilized element. And I think more and more so you'll see the programming of a squat pattern will be either a single leg or a bilateral movement, either or a combination of both. And there's just so many wonderful single movements, particularly with the work of Franz Bosch. If you haven't been exposed to any of his ideas as far as his unilateral type work is involved, do yourself a favor and have a listen to him or see what he actually does. Some marvelous specific exercises developing those single leg power activities. This has been my crusade for a wee while now. And it's to individualize, to prioritize, to optimize performance. So in the program that I've been doing, and this is, I think, more and more developmental, and we'll go on to something about the quadrant management system shortly, but I like to fathom it, the whole program, like a university program. There are some elements of the university program that are compulsory, and they're the sport-related activities. Everything else needs to be prioritized, to be individualized, so that players can optimize their rugby performance or the sport of their choice performance. It's getting to Saturday in the best possible healthy shape to actually play the game. As Joe said yesterday as well, you don't want to be responsible for beating them up in the weight room and having to tell the head coach, he ain't going to make it on Saturday, coach. You won't survive very long in this industry if that happens more than once. And maybe the once will be the last time as well. So I remember the first time I had to go to a head coach and tell him that, I was absolutely petrified. And he was actually quite rational. He said, well, you have to break a few eggs to make a great omelette. But I used powdered eggs after that with that particular player since I didn't want to break him again. So in that regards, we really need to isolate, does this player need 4 weight room sessions in pre-season? 2 or 3? How many metabolic sessions does he require? How many speed and power sessions does he require? And how do we balance that against all the other aspects of the rugby program? And that's all about communication. It's all about talking to the player, and I'll set aside, since I have the luxury in previous positions to have 2 or 3 staff members that will actually run the program while I talk to the players. So I have 5 to 10 minute interviews every Monday and saying, where do we need to take you over the next 4 weeks to allow you to be the best possible rugby player that you can be? Not the best possible weightlifter or the best possible sprinter, but the best possible rugby player. And that is a constant work on for me, is to attempt to prioritize the individual programming and to get the balance right, so that in a squad of 45, which is what we'd usually run in professional rugby, you probably want 45 similar but different programs across the board. And that's been relying on the staff to actually be around all the time, so we've got a level of coverage for all the aspects we need to consider. Vern Gambetta is the first person I heard speak about movement, not muscles, probably about 30 years ago. But I only heard the other one the other day with his athletic, not aesthetic. And there are still so many programs where it seems to be that bodybuilding is the key element of the program. I'm going to Dublin next week to speak at the GAA convention, and a lot of the programs that the players are getting are all hypertrophy-based programs emphasizing single joint movements and really specialized bodybuilding routines. What I'm going to try and do next week is really emphasize more the movement patterns in the Dan John approach, which will be interesting to see how that goes down. But I think it's very, very important to consider that all the time. I've had players that have been models in the off-season, and listening to the previous speaker talk about some of his stories about leaning up to go to the beach volleyball tournaments versus performance-related activities. So they will go off and do other things unbeknownst to me, but unfortunately then they will not be performing to their maximum for the sport they're trying to do. Different loading protocols are extremely important, particularly if you've been working with the same group of athletes for a period of time. I was blessed for a period of time from 2004 to 2011 to work with the one organisation, the Crusaders of New Zealand, in the Super Rugby tournament. And over that period of time, that's 2 full World Cup cycles, 8 years of being able to progress and develop. At the time, I used to joke that I'd spent more time with a particular player than I had with my wife, because she'd only just come on the scene and he'd been around for 7 years. So it was amazing the amount of developed trust to selection and program with that individual over that period of time. Technique is another one of my crusades. It dictates loads. It doesn't go the opposite direction and then loads dictate techniques. Because obviously our first priority as strength and conditioning coaches is similar to a teacher, which is in loco parentis, in place of the parents. You do not place your children in a position of harm to allow something to happen to them. So we're exactly the same from a weight room perspective. So be a technique fiend. Technique, technique, technique. And it's going to irritate a few people because they're going to say, well, I can't lift as much if I change that technique. You will. You've got to convince them that they will. If you improve their technique and their ability to perform those movements and their mobility, they will lift more long term. Everyone has to stop thinking about the short-term scenarios. And I know it's difficult if you've got on a cusp of losing season that you might find they're getting fired next week. But the reality is the athlete is in it for the longer game than we are with that particular group. So we need to keep changing and manipulating and moving along so that we can actually keep them healthy. I like to change the core movements, heavily influenced by Westside over the years. I don't think there's too many people in this room that wouldn't have had some influence on their careers by the use of Westside and the great Louis Simmons and the people that have come after him as well. But 3 to 4 weeks. Some players who are really advanced in their training age may change that even quicker, might be down to 2 weeks. So use a variety of different patterns, angles, bars, equipment variations to get the best out of people. And you might find, I had one player years ago who was a first 5'8", and first 5'8s aren't known for their resiliency as far as, or their love of the weight room. They are they're your rugby quarterbacks basically. So this guy hated the weight room. So I chased down some bodyweight training programs, the Matt Fury combat conditionings back in that day. And we introduced that to him, and he took to it like a duck to water. He loved it. And he would be always doing these particular Matt Fury combat conditioning protocols. And he had a really, really solid year. And I was saying, well, you're now weight training. He said, well, no, I'm just doing bodyweight. I said, well, you are weight training. So you've improved because you actually adhered to an exercise program and you complied with that exercise program. Often it's hard to find something that someone's going to love and get passionate about. But this guy felt passionately about this particular program, and he got the results because he put the time and effort into it. Whereas other people are big on their squats or big on their deadlifts as you're going through. We'll have a look through with them. Crossover is important. Obviously, we know that strength is our mother of all biomotor qualities. But there are certain times when you have to pull back on the strength. You'll have to shift across. You'll have to move along the force velocity curve. And we'll address some of those issues. But it's important that we're looking at both explosive and non-explosive protocols, the phase of the year. But I found, following a conjugate type system, and obviously whatever you don't train, you lose, it's important to actually touch on elements of everything along that force velocity curve at some time through the course of the week, the month, and the actual training year. Huge improvement over the last few years in recovery. Still probably one of the underdone aspects in rugby for sure. But the ability to train is governed by the ability to recover. And with the amount of apps available and all other elements, it comes down, we need to work on the ones we that we know for sure work. Obviously sleep, obviously nutrition, stretching post-exercise, which in my sport is probably the one that's done the absolute worst. Is that people just feel, we'll just stretch in the shower or we'll get out of here. But it's truly trying to maintain that elements of what's important to you as a coach, but also to get them involved at the same time. Right, a couple of quotes there. What game do we play in the strength training facility? Again, we're training rugby players, not little weightlifters or not little bodybuilders or whatever. Remember the group of people you're training, their training age, their foundational status. If you're working with younger athletes working through, we need to establish some correct movement patterns before we progress up our chain of command up to our progressions versus our regressions. And if a player breaks down, I remember years ago with the NSCA's checklist, I think it's one of the first things I used working with groups of players, in that I didn't use the complete checklist. I probably took 5 major points out of that checklist, and they were my 5 go-tos for each of the major exercises that I'd coach. And if a player could actually go through and technically perform the lift and get 5 check marks, then they were allowed to put some weight on the bar. But as soon as they progressed to the point where they only got 4 checkpoints out of 5, then they had to hold that particular weight to progress until they could get further. And to this day, it's probably still one of the best programs that I wrote. That's probably 25 years ago. It's about addressing the technique concerns and loading appropriately over time. And with the new Foundations of Lift course, you have that ability now to get those checklists for those particular exercises and revisit them. And even if you break them down to the 5 that mean the most to you, and then correct players as they go. It's huge, huge positive. The last one on that list, it's by a colleague of mine, Damien Marsh. Now works for the Fiji Rugby Union as the head of physical performance. And I think that encapsulates everything that we're trying to do in the strength and conditioning world for our sports. Because it's all about the buy-in you get, so the compliance factors, from the players you have in the environment that you help create. Again, I hark back to yesterday's talk with Joe, because if you missed it, make sure you grab a copy of it, because it was brilliant. I would have actually screened it back here rather than me be up here. I would have sat back in the audience and listened to it again, because it was just perfect. I think every strength and conditioning coach needs to hear that. In that, it's your attitude when you get to the weight room. We all get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock to get to the weight room to train athletes. That's just what we do. But if you're tired, you can't appear tired to the group, because your energy gives them energy. And then you get it back, and it just self-perpetuates. So it's an amazing environment when that sort of is happening. When the music's on and everyone's hitting PBs in there, it's just the best place in the world. I mean, it's really awesome, as you all know. But that comes from the environment that you help create. It's not down to the sets and the reps. I wish I could say that my sets and reps and programmings had been successful in getting people to a certain point. But I think the bigger compliment comes back from the player and saying, I was really down today, and you basically got me to do what I wanted to do. I hit it because you were here. That is probably the best thing I hear on a semi-regular basis. It's the positivity coming through because you've been positive and you're going, let's go. And I'll give you an example of a adherence thing in a short period of time. I want to step back, and this is what we put in place with our academy. This is what we're putting in place in the Stade Francais Academy, is rather than jumping ahead to where they have been and looking at the professional program and just go basically cherry picking things out of the professional program, it's just go back to these movement patterns. I mean, unfortunately, I've never met Dan John, and I've never been in a position where I've actually attended one of his seminars. I'm sure many of you here have. But just listening to podcasts with him and reading some of his great literature, these just basic movement patterns form the foundation of the learning of the young athlete, which is going to keep them in good space for their entire career. That combined with the mobility drills, because strength without mobility and flexibility is often a liability. So in order to be able to express what we've done in the weight room on the field, we need to be able to move and be mobile and flexible. But it all comes down to those movements. I mean, the loaded carry, the squat, the hinge, the pull, and the push. I mean, there's your starting programming, full stop. You can be a little bit sexier with some of the other aspects if you want to, but there's your meat and potatoes, bare bones. Let's start with that. And for me, it would be a 3-day-a-week program, and it'd be whatever exercise to actually go through there and the appropriate number of sets and reps to allow us to get the job done inside 75 minutes with our mobility drills, everything thrown on top. Now, I mentioned this a little bit before, and this is what I refer to as a quadrant management system. It's actually interesting listening to a couple of speakers, and they were saying that they know, or they very rarely read strength and conditioning literature anymore, particularly if you're a slightly older strength and conditioning coach. They read more philosophy, they read more business management, motivation, all that sort of material that's floating out there. But this came from a business book I was reading about 10 years ago, and it's just slowly developed for me, and this is what I do a lot of my programming and what I put in place over the last 3 years to Edinburgh. When someone comes to me and I don't know anything about them, their background, their academy they came from, the team they used to train with, and what that strength and conditioning coach would have prescribed to them, they're basically on a level 1. A very dictatorial program for me. You will do this, sets, reps, exercises, bang. So there's no discussion whatsoever. It's no degrees of freedom. But over a period of time, if I've seen that you've got excellent technique, you can perform those movements with a good load, and you have no issues in adding the intensity that I want you to add, then we're going to give you a degree of freedom. And the first degree of freedom that I like to give them is exercise selection. So within the weight rooms I've been associated with, we will have every possible exercise variation we can for a particular category. So if it was going back to a squat category, we'd have, in one case I've been in 67 different squat options. Do we use all of them? Definitely not. Probably use 5 of them on a regular basis, and again we can actually rotate those exercises through so that we're actually looking at different elements. There's also single leg, there's bilateral, there's lunge patterns within that as well. So we've got a lot to choose from. The player will select one and maintain that for a 3 to 4 week period, and then we'll rotate again. So that's his now 1 degree of freedom. Now if someone progresses again nicely and they're looking at competency in a range of different movements, we then move them to level 3, which is 2 degrees of freedom. And 2 degrees of freedom now includes a methodology, a sets and rep protocol. But the big thing behind that, to allow them to make informed, educated choices, they have to be educated. So we educate all on the way. Why do we do cluster training? Why do we do complexes? Why do we use VBT? Great story from another speaker the other day about a player who everyone thought, oh, he was not very smart. But then in one situation he came out and said, oh, coach, we're going to use 0.8 meters per second on this particular exercise because we're looking at strength speed. And they were just gobsmacked that he actually knew and had learned what we were trying to do in the VBT session for that particular day. So now we've got methodology considerations. And finally, it's training frequency. Do you get the most out of 2 days a week? So you get lots more recovery. 3 days a week, 4 days a week? Would you prefer to just do one exercise, focus on that, and do 5 days a week? How often are you going to train if you are playing, if you are starting, if you're off the bench, or you've been rested for that particular week? Can we do a little extra volume or a little extra intensity on certain exercises? That will all come down to the conversations we have, the environment we've created, so that they can make informed choices. Now, you'd think that your oldest, most experienced players would be level 4s. And as I did. And then I had a senior All Black talk to me one day in the weight room, and he said, Ash, I've got a lot of things going on. I mean, I've got media commitments, I've got sponsorship commitments, I've got, I'm head of this department within the organization, I need to look at this, I need to this. You're giving me all this freedom to choose, but it's too much for me. Just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it. So we've actually come full circle. So the level 4s often want to be treated like level 1s again, because they trust you to do what's best for them. As much as you've given them the trust to decide that I trust you to make good informed choices and decisions, it's swung around. Now, I don't know if you know the history of martial arts. Before the days where it was commercialized and a belt system came in. So if we go back into Japan in the feudal era, every beginner was given a white belt. The white belt, as it does today, signifies purity, first-timer, introduction. As you trained and developed your skills through blood, through sweat, through tears, through dirt, the white belt got darker and grayer and blacker, and suddenly it became a black belt. So the level of mastery was through practice over time and became the black belt. But unfortunately, as happens a lot these days, as soon as a person gets a black belt, it's almost an end point. And then they say, yeah, I've got a black belt, that's it. But in the days gone by, that individual would continue to train, to teach, to pass on his wisdom to the next generation of white belts coming through, and his belt got grayer and frayed and turned white. So it came a full circle from white belt to black belt to white belt. Similar to this quadrant management system, that the most experienced people often, if they've been with you for a period of time, want you to give them what you think is best for them. And that is my major programming aspect that I've put in place over the last few years. And I tell you, it works. It really builds compliance within the individuals. They have ownership of their programs. And in the end, at level 4, you're there as an advisor to check technique, to coach, as we all should do every single day of our lives, to get in there and say, well, no, you might want to think about changing this, or you need to change that, or how do you feel about that? So again, it's the communication aspect is so extremely important associated with what we do. So just to get on to some specifics now. The 3 key areas that I program for within the sport of rugby is you need to be either faster, which is emphasis on neural and speed and power, or you need to be fitter, which is our metabolic systems, or we need to be stronger, which is a combination of both neural and mechanical. So there'll be elements of these within all the programs. Again, whatever you don't train, you lose. So we need to touch on them all, but certain people may need to touch on more than less, or less than more, because often less is definitely better, and less is definitely more. So, force velocity curve, nothing new to anyone in this weight room. Depending on where that person is in their quadrant management, we will then probably perform an explosive strength decrement test and see whether they are more geared towards improving from the velocity side of the curve, or more in the strength side of the curve, or a more balanced development where we're going to touch on each and every element within that in equal components. So you might find you're doing 2 maximal strength movements, but you're only doing 1, say, ballistic movement or plyometric movement to augment that particular program. And velocity-based training has been such a wonderful tool, again, to verify what we think about particular elements, but also looking at the fine-tuning of the different speeds that we need individuals to move at to generate whether it's going to be force, strength, speed, strength, or other elements that we're trying to look at. Little one on the right, if you've been to Jim Aware's booth downstairs, too late now, but I'm sure you can get one of these. Really handy little marker to have with you. And we've actually had that blown up and put in our weight room, so the players, again, we're educating the players all the time about what velocity we're moving and why we're actually moving it. And again, once they know, then it becomes a very, very powerful tool. And something looking at the various velocities, this is also part of our weight room wall with those average bar velocities. So whether we're going to look at peak velocities or average velocities will depend on the exercise we choose. But again, very, very powerful in the education. And in like 2 pre-seasons ago, we had a 2-hour block once a week in the pre-season mode as a strength and conditioning introduction course for our entire squad. So they actually started to understand why we got them to do certain things. Something that's been exceptionally good for me with the players that I've worked with is this force velocity curve programming. So we'll work from the velocity aspect through to the slower speed, higher force type movements, and looking at combinations along the way there. The other one which we've used is also doing some speed work, coming straight back into the weight room, and then doing some either plyometrics or some jump squats or some block snatches or hang clean push press, depending on the individual. Then going back out again, a little bit of PAP, going back out again and doing another 10 or 20 meter sprint through the gates, looking at variations in speed, seeing if we get some neural efficiency going there with improvement in that 10 meter time. And then back in again, doing a little bit more work. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then, finishing off with our slower speed work. So our maximal strength work, maximal force work, whether it's a trap bar deadlift, whether it's a box squat, whether it's a variation on the theme from them. And then whatever single leg or hamstring related activities we need to do to finish off, because we don't want to do hamstring work while we're doing high speed work or acceleration work, since the cost-benefit relationship could end up in injury for them. So variations. So you can see within that, there is so many programming variations that you can hang your hat on for the entire training year. Now, a couple of elements of power. Let me just talk you through the first one. This gentleman is a 21-year-old, number 6. And this is where communication beats the science every single time. This particular player on the left, who just finished that clean, red flagged on 3 of his 5 daily tests early in the week. Your sit and reach, your grip squeeze, your vertical jump, knee to wall, and hand grip dynamometer, which we used on a regular basis. So the science would say he probably is pretty flat, he needs to rest. But first and foremost, and it's a conversation I try and have with every single player every single day, is how are you feeling today? I know what the test just told me, but how are you feeling? And in this particular case, Magnus said, yeah, I'm a little bit flat. I know I didn't go too well, but can I just warm up a wee bit and see where I finish up? I said, okay, let's just take you through your normal warm-up progressions, 60, 80, 100 kilos on the bar, a couple of reps on each. And he said, oh, how do I look? I said, well, you look really quick, you look good. How do you feel? He said, I felt really good. I said, well, okay, let's go a little bit higher and see how we go. And this particular day was heading up to doing about 5 reps total above 95% of max. So working off PRILEPIN'S table and looking at that particular workout. And I don't care, in that position, I didn't care if he did them in singles, a couple of doubles in a single, it was up to him. So he went to 120, went to 140, and he said, I'm ready to go. So his PB previous to this was 150. He went 150, 155, 160 in probably one of the heaviest series I've ever seen in a rugby weight room, and set 2 PBs along the way and equal to previous PB. Even though his readiness wellness testing he only got 60% basically. So again, that relationship, that communication is so important in the environment you help create to get players to be the best they can possibly be. We could use a lightened method. I don't know how much you use lightened methods in the weight room, but I mean, they have become, this particular player has really, really poor thoracic mobility through a series of neck and shoulder traumas over his career. And this is his go-to peak power exercise. And it took a little bit of trial and error to find out which was applicable for him. But this is now his number one go-to as far as what we want. We want that, obviously, that triple extension happening. We want that feeling of explosiveness for him to feel that, because he hasn't been able to clean or snatch or do anything like that for probably 5 seasons. So now that he's got an exercise he can use, he's as happy as they come. Now, moving into the metabolic aspect, as I said, we were going to primarily look at the weight room. And you may know some of the work I've done with what's referred to as the beastly circuit. And I'm not sure if I stole that from Martin Rooney or Alwyn Cosgrove or one of the other really, really good programming and strength and conditioning coaches along the way. But the beast circuit has been told to me by many players that it's equivalent to what they feel in a game. So we'll often use that as one of our metabolic training. And for those who are unfamiliar with the beast circuit, I've got a copy of it on another computer that I can show you. But it's 6 exercises. And the one we usually use is deadlift, hang clean, push press, front squat, bend over row, Romanian deadlift. So select the weight that's appropriate for you. 6 reps. Once you pick the weight up, you don't put it down again until you finish the 6th rep, if you put a 6th set of the way through. And then after you finish that, you jump straight on a watt bike and you cycle through 2 Ks as fast as you possibly can. And then you go back and start it again. And you do that 6 times. Takes about 28 minutes to complete. So it's a very, very solid metabolic circuit. I had an academy coach from Scotland do that, and he was a former Olympic 400-meter runner for Great Britain, and his average heart rate was 164 beats per minute for the entire session, and he hit 185 beats per minute as his peak heart rate for the session. So very, very effective movement. Now this one here I put together just recently because I love playing with the equipment that I have in the weight room that I'm now in. And this was with Stade Francais. And this particular one was working with some younger players that were trying to expose more of a metabolic aspect too, but using the power type exercises. As you can see there, very straightforward, but combinations. So superset style, and then move on to the next one and work your way through. And we probably just go through this 3 to 5 times. Now I've got some video associated with both these to show you. So we've got band squats, band box squats, and band bench press. Again, just working at 5 repetitions, depending on the actual exercise. And from that particular exercise, they would go straight from the exercise to the body weight plyometric or the unresisted sort of movement. So quick, or should be quick, rapid explosion jumps either in following the band bench press or the band squats, back and forth, and then moving from there onto the next one in sequence with either block cleans, and from the block cleans, he'll go into a med ball scoop toss, and then either a hip thrust. We can use this with bands, we can use this in the rack with straight weight, depending on, again, what you have available or what level of development the individual player is, and then from there straight into kettlebell swings. Now you'll see, I don't know how many weight rooms have a chandelier in them, but you probably see the top right-hand corner of the left-hand picture has a chandelier hanging off it. That's Paris for you anyway. So Paris, France, not Paris, Texas. Don't know if they'd have chandeliers in Paris, Texas. Right, from there, from that particular exercise, we're going on the left-hand one there is the, obviously the Cybex Real Runner. Oh, sorry, Kaiser Real Runner. Sorry, any Kaiser people in the place. And then straight into single leg bench blasts. So 10 explosive reps each leg on the Kaiser, and then basically straight into the single leg bench press. You can see this young man is starting to get quite fatigued. Jammer with a band, and from the jammer with the band goes into a single arm med ball throw against the pillar. Colours of the team are pink and blue, if you haven't already worked that one out. And then he'll grab that med ball, ideally relatively quickly, and just big thrust. Not the best technique on that one, I'm afraid to say. Then following that, we went through 5 rotations of that. It took 25 minutes, and then we just selected one upper body push, one upper body pull, and put it into a hypertrophy protocol, since these are young academy players. This young man's only 19 years of age. Did play for French under-20s this year, so he's got a talent for the game. Now, another circuit, totally different to the last one, was one where we just did this one with a tight head prop, similar to your down lineman, probably more probably an offensive lineman than a defensive lineman. Big, strong lad, as you can see, working from exercise to exercise. Call it, I think people call it something like Filthy 5 or something like that. Again, the resurgence of circuit training. It was always called circuit training when I was growing up. People have made it different and called it after women they don't like. But now it's a really, really strong tool to develop those elements of endurance, muscle endurance, metabolic aspects. And again, we've had heart rate monitors on all these guys during these particular sessions, and they're really solid around 165s, 170s for the duration of the time. And they get so similar to the amount of work they do in constant phase play rugby. Let's let him go through this for you. You see the equipment that is available. It wasn't the weight room that I designed or chose, but you just have to basically work with what you got. Because obviously we don't ever have unlimited budgets to achieve what we want to achieve, but they did have a great mix of different equipment. And I'll let you look at that. I'll let you look at these band box squats, not bad actually. It's about 6'2", about 122 kilos. And right, we mentioned loaded carries before, actually running down in time there. So I'm going to flick through these quickly because you have them in your notes. But obviously anything written by Dan John is going to be 100%. Just for my own reason. Use of Strongman. This was me. This is in Iceland, and there is a group of 5 stones, you might have read about it, called the fisherman's testing stones in days gone by. They're still there, there's 5 of them, different weights. The weight that I struggled to lift to my shoulder gives me the grand title of, I'm not going to actually say it in Icelandic, but I'll translate it into English for you, pathetic. And it goes all the way to full strength, which is, I think, about 200 pounds. That one is 23 pounds, and it is a really, really dense basalt rock. Same rock that I lifted up over my head just to feel good about myself after I couldn't get the next one that only weighed 54 pounds. But they will still be there when I'm ready. That's for one thing, so they'll be around. So I know I'm going a little bit over time, but this is the last session of the day, so I want to give you your money's worth. Right, Strongman, this is one that I've regularly used in our weight room in Paris. 3 people on each group, rotating through those ones. 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, move to the next grouping. So trap bar, overhead walk, again, utilizing what you have, tire flip, kettlebell windmill, a core exercise, and a loaded carry exercise or a push or a pull movement. Very, very effective. I first started using Strongman for training when I worked with a rugby league team in Australia back in 1996, 97. So again, it's what you have available. And there's plenty of people who have got things like this available they can actually throw into the workout, which makes for a really, really good, solid testing session. That's straight out of T-Nation. I'm sure you've seen that. Right, just to finish off with my strength programming ideas and the ones that have been most productive for me. 3 days per week in the off-season is where I've been to 4 days, I've been to 5 days, I'm coming back to 3 days. I'm feeling more the full body workout rather than the split program. Gives my guys more time to recover. I can go a heavy, light, medium if I wish over the course of the work. The first book I ever bought was that wonderful book by Bill Starr, The Strongest Shall Survive. I bought it at the 1980 Mr. Olympia contest in my hometown of Sydney, and Franco Columbu signed it for me. So it is a really treasured gift that I give it to myself. Time between 45 and 75 minutes, looking at hormonal aspects associated with that as well. Mobility, preparation, stretch are on top of that. They're not included in that 45 to 75 minutes. Now, depending on the individual, they could do a loaded body push and pull, a lower body push and pull, and an upper body push and pull, and a loaded carry, so 5 exercises. They could just do 4 exercises, or, which I still think is one of the most productive routines of all time, the push-pull squat. And that's from the original Bill Starr power clean, bench press, squat. So nothing hasn't been done, and everything comes into vogue once again. Tweed suits will come into vogue again at some stage down the track. I'm going to be ready. So these just 2 guys, one doing strength resisted bands with a trap bar. The one doing it now is a 90 kilogram winger, so similar to one of your wide receivers. And the gentleman on the right is a 30-plus-year-old loose head prop, and he's deadlifting 300 kilos. And that was in a game week. So again, as people talked about the stress, we have to stress these guys. It's what we do. We have to take into consideration all the other stresses that are around their lives, but we have to stress them periodically and take them to places where they may not necessarily want to go, because no improvement ever comes in the comfort zone. So we have to continually take them outside that comfort zone, communicate with what they want and what they need, and often what they want and what they need are 2 totally different things, so it's up to us to convince them what they need as much as what they want to put in the program. I'm just going to flick through these last couple because they're all fairly familiar. If you have been using PRILEPIN'S table for a wee while now and have found some really solid gains with the guys and they get excellent buy-in, a couple of calculators that I always use on hand with the players. I get the players to use them and know what they mean, and they will be on this as well, where we work on intensity number of lifts for single lifts and basically look around our full table and see where is important to where they need to go for that particular exercise. Speciality bars, I think, are an essential component. If I had my gym again, there wouldn't be too many straight bars in the place. There'd be a variety of these particular variations. These are my go-tos as far as what's worked over the last wee while as far as programming is concerned. And these are fully available to you at any time you want them. Again, you can see it's very simple. It's only a 4-week progression. It could only go 3 weeks for a particular person before we change it, but it gives us an opportunity to actually take them to the edge occasionally and max them out. Now, this chart is in our weight room, and with a few modifications for the rest of my career will be in every weight room that I work in, because it's what I use as a reference for me, but it's more important, it's an education tool for the athletes I work with. So they can see the force velocity curve and where we move from higher speed activities to lower speed activities. The top left-hand corner is something I did for Elite FTS a couple of years ago, which surprisingly generated a lot of interest because it's quite sad that I can put my entire career of over 30 years into just one A4 sheet. I don't know if it's that sad or it's actually quite good. I'm yet to decide on that, but that allows people to pinpoint where they need to go, where they need to spend more time being strong, where they need to go into more explosive power type workouts. So that's the important element with that. But all those charts, you can see our top 5 exercises per category. Again, I can give you this if you'd like to receive it outside. Some of our goals, as far as strength deficits, strength goals are concerned, and a whole wide range of numbers up there for them to look at. And they'll see that all the time. And once they get going, they'll start asking questions. So, well, why am I only doing that whereas he's doing that? I said, well, you're not ready to do that, so we need to actually make you ready. So some final thoughts, finishing off. And this is a bit of a crusade for me, though, last week as well, is are your preferential biases for a certain type of training getting in the way of making people better at the sport that they play? If you're a powerlifter, if you're a strongman, if you're an Olympic lifter, is that the core elements of your program because that's what you know? I remember my first ever conference. There was a speaker up here from one of the more prestigious universities. I was working with basketball back in those days. And he had this program of what they do. And there was a incline press, there was a flat bench dumbbells, there was a decline press, there was a close grip bench press, and there was dips to finish it off. And I was thinking, like, that doesn't gel with what I think. And then I saw him by the pool the next day, and he was chiseled. He was a slab of pecs. It looks like he only ever did pecs. But it looked like to me that he programmed his players so he could jump in with any of them and get a workout at the same time. Now, this is almost 25 years ago, so things have changed dramatically over that period of time, thank God. Secondarily, slightly out of the weight room, but I think important, are you training players to pass a test? Are you training them just to get your stats up, to try and say, well, yeah, I've made them stronger, they're fitter, they're faster, we went 2-9 this season, but I did my job. Irrespective of where you get them fitter, faster, or stronger, you will be judged, whether it's right or wrong, on your win-loss record. I think that's echoing the thoughts of a few people up here over the last couple of days. But it's true. And you will be fired, you'll be rehired, someone else will pick you up, and I'm in that situation. I'm 56 years old. I'm taking this year off to concentrate on speaking, writing, and having a wee bit of a rest. And I'm hoping there's a new gig coming up shortly, but I don't know that for sure. So you must choose, in the immortal words of the Crusader Knight. But choose wisely, because an unwise choice will result in your death and the death of your career. Thanks very much for listening, and safe travels home.